Thank you for joining me for this photo share and Storytel on my 2020 trip to Bergen, Norway. I planned this trip when the air bridge miraculously opened, and I just thought I've always wanted to see Bergen. It's somewhere I've long since wanted to go. And my enthusiasm was further increased because my son had been on a business trip there and had shared photos and talked about it. And I thought, I've just got to go to Bergen. Now, at that time, there were no direct flights from Iceland, none at all. There are not many now, but there are from most cities around the world. It's possible to travel direct to Bergen. But I didn't let that put me off. I booked to stay in Oslo for 2 nights. I flew to Oslo, stayed there for 2 nights, did a bit of sightseeing there. And then I took the magnificent train ride that connects Oslo to Bergen. And I thoroughly recommend this. The scenery is so amazing. And the tracks actually rise to a height of 1,222 meters. And you will see some of the spectacular ski areas that feature on programs such as Ski Sunday in the UK along the route. Although, of course, in the middle of summer, these are beautiful green grassy areas rather than snow-covered. But it was a wonderful journey from A to B, and I definitely would not have wanted to miss out on that train ride. So I want to talk a little bit about how user-friendly, well, Oslo is user-friendly, but I felt especially Bergen was user-friendly because it is very easy to walk everywhere if you want to. It is a small city. Crime rates are very low. It is very friendly. It is very comfortable for lone female travellers. And also I found quite friendly for lone female travellers, even for those who, like me, are of what I will call a very nice age. I found, that people just were spontaneous and friendly, people of all ages. And it does have to be remembered that I went during the time when there were not many international travellers, and I had wondered how it would be with groups of Norwegian people when I don't speak Norwegian. But I actually found that I was welcomed by groups, in the guest house, etc. And they would, most of them would speak English. Sometimes, of course, they didn't. And sometimes in a group, people were speaking their own language, but they would always kind of give a summary or an overview for me. And I felt it was an extremely inclusive experience that really went beyond my expectations. But of course, now we're in normal times, there will be many travellers from around the world. So I wouldn't worry about that. But I was pleasantly surprised. So I'm now going to share my screen with you. Let me just do that. Let's grab hold of the screen here and get it. There we are, got it. So I'm just going to now, should be able to, there we are. For some reason, I always seem to need a second hit to increase the size of my screen share. I don't know why that is. I'm just a bit clumsy. So here we are. So the attraction of Bergen for me was in part the history, the general charm, the forests, the kind of nature, the fact that it was a small city. I didn't need to have a car because that was another goal for this trip. I didn't want to have to rent a car to see the things that I wanted to see. And most of the places that I went to, I could actually go on foot. That was very nice and very easy. because it is a very compact city, like a ribbon development around the waterfront with some small extension into outlying areas, but very small. And the local buses were excellent. And I would heartily recommend purchasing a Bergen card. There are various durations available, because they will give you not just access to the buses, these cards, but to the local city trams. Even tram number 1 that goes to the Bergen airport is included under the Bergen City card, which can be purchased online from the tourist information that is right there on the quay, or from many hotels. And you also, with this card, will get free or reduced access to many of the attractions, such as museums in the city, the wonderful KODE Galleries, and some other places. So that is what I would recommend. To talk about costs of Norway, because people do say it is expensive, I made the lady in tourist information laugh when she asked me what I had thought of it so far. And I said I thought it was cheap. And she said that she hadn't often heard that, because she thought I'd come from England. And I explained that I had arrived from Iceland and things were just a little bit cheaper. But to give a price comparison, I would say that Bergen is cheaper than Oslo. I would also say that Bergen is definitely cheaper than London. And when it comes to accommodation, Bergen, in a cheaper end guest house, I would say that Bergen is definitely cheaper than London, most other British cities, and also some seaside resorts. Certainly areas around some parts of Cornwall, you would not find guest house accommodation at the price I paid for it, although I did stay in a shared dorm where I was going. But now that COVID is over, there are many types of accommodation that are open, and you should be able to find accommodation, particularly if you're sharing with one other person. You should be able to, under £40 per night each is very, very doable. Maybe not in Oslo, but certainly in Bergen, and certainly, in Tromsø. I know that because I have booked it for my next trip. So to come back to Bergen, I arrived around tea time, about between 6 and 7 o'clock, having taken the wonderful train journey. And I just walked for 5 minutes from the station, and I was greeted by this wonderful view of the city. And it's just beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. And, Bergen is a city, but it's also like a fishing town, a fishing village. And of course, it did grow up based on fishing, but also as a major trading port of the Hanseatic League, which gives it, a special kind of development. But what you can see in the photographs here is the famous Bergen buildings, which are part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You can see the beautiful forests above the town, and the hill that you see in the background is the Fløyen recreational area. Fløyen, it's a small mountain. It's 400 meters high, and it's steep. There is a funicular railway which will take you up to the recreational area, and I believe there are also walks up, but I didn't try those. So let me just move this on now. It would like to move on. I don't know why it doesn't. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So let me try this. There we are. So another 5 minutes of walking to the Marken guest house where I was staying took me through what they call the Marken quarter of the city. This is an artisan area. It's very pretty, very attractive. And there are all sorts of, individual stores and shops. And this place here is the Aura Cafe. I didn't have a meal there, but the meals looked very nice. And I did sit outside with a cup of coffee, which it was lovely to do on a warm and sunny evening. And you do have to, in Norway, grab the best of the weather. If there is something that you really don't want to do in the rain and you haven't got rain at that moment, it's best to do it here and now, because Bergen is, I believe, one of the wettest places in Europe. My 4 nights and 3 full days there certainly compared for both rainfall, temperature and sunshine with a summer stay that I had in Snowdonia that is also known for its rainfall. So I would say if you come to this area, and I hope you do if you come to Bergen, that you dress as you pack as though you're going to Snowdonia, because you might encounter very similar weather conditions. It wasn't quite as hot as in Oslo, but did get up to about 25 degrees. So you need to be prepared for that too. I think the lowest temperature I encountered was when I arrived, and I think that was about 10 or 11 degrees and raining. But you just have to be open to the flow. I always say, I would say don't come to Bergen if you're not willing to tolerate rain, because although you might be lucky, you're quite likely to get some rain during your time there. So the guest house was actually just around the corner from here. And I was very heartened by, I'd heard that this area was charming. I'd seen some pictures, but the atmosphere of being there was even nicer than I expected, I would say. And then I turned the corner and came to the guest house, which actually didn't look very impressive from outside. It looked rather like a commercial building, and there were offices on the ground floor. But there was a very nice lift up to the guest house on the 4th floor. Now, this guest house offers, as many Nordic guest houses do, it offers the use of a kitchen and a guest dining area, and also nice seating areas. It was, it's very, very attractive. Meals are not provided. It is self-catering. It's just a very bright, cheerful, and I want to say arty place to stay. There were lots of plants, lots of brightness. It was very clean, and looking back over the reviews, it was always very clean. And that is the normal standard, whether you're on a train, in a guest house, in a cafe, in the Nordic region. There is generally, everything is bright, fresh, clean, well ventilated. And normally people create, a certain charm. So most of the places that you go into will be quite attractive and often quite individual in style. Now, I could have rented a two-bedroom here, but I would have had to have paid a little bit more because I am one person and it was summer. So I decided to stay in a women's dormitory, which was very nice. It was spacious, bright, with Juliet balconies and opened out, and even had the doors that opened out on a courtyard. So there was always lots of fresh air, which was nice and very, very welcome, because I do sometimes find that is lacking a little bit, access to fresh air, windows, lots of windows that will open. Sometimes they exist in budget accommodation in England, other times ventilation is a little bit more limited. And the great thing about this, it was just a few minutes walk from everywhere, from the attractions of the city, the artisan shops, so, you know, sources of provisions. There was a co-op as well as the artisan shops, all within less than 5 minutes walk. So that was great. So this is the site that greeted me when I decided, well, when I just sort of checked in, decided to look around a bit. And then I decided that because it had been recommended to me and I had spent the day traveling, that I would like to eat out on my first evening. And my son had recommended Pygmalion Cafe Gallery to me, which is both a gallery and a cafe. They changed the pictures on the walls are changed, I believe, every month or maybe even more often now. I don't know. But, you know, there are exhibitions that are thoughtfully put together and they change over time. But Pygmalion Cafe is situated in one of Bergen's charming areas, and there are many charming areas. It is the yellow building sort of towards the centre of the image. The other cafe, Naomi, I spoke to people who, you know, used that facility and they said it was excellent. But I thought I would like the atmosphere of Pygmalion better. And I would say that if I had to translate what I paid for this meal, which is a lasagna with salad and glass of red wine, into English currency, I think it came out to about £18, which wasn't bad at all. And you know, it compared favorably also. It was a little bit less than what I would pay probably in Iceland for a similar meal at that time. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. The atmosphere was nice, the service was good, the environment was cheerful, and it was a perfect way to start my first evening before I then went out sightseeing. And with this being early August, it was still light. It did get dark, but it was light quite late into the evening. And when I left there, it was probably about, I don't know, 9:30, something like that. So I then went out to explore and to wander. And I wandered for a couple of hours, just looking at the city and the lights that you see tracing their way up the mountainside. That shows the pathway taken by the funicular railway. And, you know, I just couldn't wait really to explore it all. I was getting tired and it was an uphill walk back up to Marken, but it only took me about 10, maybe 15 minutes max. And I was glad then to get a good night's sleep. So the following day when I woke up, very, very heavy rain and forecast all day. So it was time for me to get my 24-hour Bergen card and to hit the museums. First of all, I wandered around and I got some provisions. I actually went out to the co-op to get my breakfast, and then I started to meet more guests in the guest house, and that was lovely. Just, you know, I'd sit at a table and people would come and talk to me, and it was just very nice to be there, and I knew absolutely that I'd chosen the right place to stay. So I got myself set for the day. I brought my provisions for my evening meal and I'd taken those back, and then I went to the tourist information and I was on their doorstep when they opened, and I purchased my Bergen City card. And my first stop was to take a bus ride to the Fisheries Museum, which shows many, many aspects of the fishing trade in Bergen, because that, of course, is their most important export. But there were other exhibits in the exhibition that were associated with with Bergen and its seafaring past, not just fishing. And this is a mast with a illuminated drawing of a Viking ship. And this was found near Bergen, this mast. And so that finished up in the exhibition. But the other exhibitions that, it's a little bit difficult taking photographs in there because the light is subdued to preserve the artifacts. But it's all the history of the fishing industry as far back as they can go going forwards, and how this developed with the Hanseatic League and so on. And there is fascinating information. And I spent a couple of hours there. And then it was time to move on. And I decided to go out again on using the bus. It was easier to use the bus a little bit, partly because the rain was very heavy. And although I don't mind walking in the rain, I've always got a good raincoat. I felt it would be nice just to go on the bus and spend more time exploring King Haukon's Hall. This is not actually the oldest building in Bergen. The oldest building in Bergen is actually in the city. It's Maria Kirk, the Mary Church, and I believe that is about 100 years older than this building. But these are the buildings that were built by King Haukonson, and I don't really know that I'm pronouncing it correctly, although I'm using the Icelandic pronunciation for King Haukon here. So I apologize if Norwegian people find my pronunciation funny. But anyway, this hall is absolutely massive. What you see there is a tiny part of it, and it looks big in the photograph. And whilst it is a 13th century hall, it is absolutely amazing that it is still used. Sorry, I believe it's 12th century. I would have to check that. It is still used today for grand occasions, for civic events. And when my son was in Norway on business, he actually attended an evening dinner that took place in this hall. And it's wonderful, I think, for something to be both a museum that the public can go in, and also something, you know, for a building to still be put to practical use. And for a long time, this was, you know, the main sort of ceremonial residence of the King of Norway, the ceremonial residence in the west of Norway for the King of Norway. And I just so loved being there. I met some German tourists who actually took this photograph. We had a very nice conversation. And when I emerged, I got a lovely surprise because the sun was shining. So it was time then to explore the glories of the Bergen area of Bergen. And these buildings were established by the people that really were the beginning of the Hanseatic Trading League, which extended all around the northern parts and the North Sea. And when I walked through to the back of these buildings, I saw, there's kind of alleyways that weave in and out of them. It's difficult to describe, but there are. And I came to a building that reminded me of somewhere. And I thought, I know that I've seen something very like that, almost identical, in my childhood. And I couldn't think where, but I knew it wasn't in Devon. I knew it was before we moved to Devon when I lived in Essex. And during that time, as well as holidays to Devon, we used to go out sort of around Norfolk, Essex, those areas that, you know, were not too far away for day trips, obviously. Anyway, I came to some information, and it was mentioned that the Norwegians established a Hanseatic League outpost in King's Lynn in Norfolk. And they actually put up this style of building there, and there was a drawing. And yes, I had been to King's Lynn, so the puzzle was over. I knew where I had seen that building. But today, as well as lots of information, and there is a Bergen museum that gives you a lot more information, these buildings are occupied by many beautiful shops. Some of them are artisan shops, you know, people making things, they're workshops and shops, in other words. There was a beautiful crystal shop that happened to be having an open evening called, I think it's called, Staines Centre. And they were having an open evening. They normally closed at 6. So I was able to go in, and that was wonderful. They had a very good selection, as well as, you know, lots of crystal jewellery, and I believe they made some on the premises. So I absolutely loved that. And this is how narrow some of the alleyways are in Bergen. They really are so narrow that you can stand with your arms outstretched. And certainly if you've got long arms, you can touch both sides of this one. But this is what I mean about, it's like going into an Aladdin's cave in a way, but an Aladdin's cave that's, you know, constructed of Bergen's history at the same time. It just was glorious, and I so loved it. And I spent so much time walking around there that I was getting really hungry, and I decided not to do anything else and just to go back to the Marken guest house and prepare my food. And if you're staying in Bergen and you're self-catering, or even if you just want a snack to take out with you, I thoroughly recommend Bergen's fish market. It's the best that I have been in to date. And, you know, I have been to quite a few, Newlyn, Gothenburg, and so on, but this would certainly be up there with the best that I have visited. And the tastiest smoked mackerel ever. I always prepare simple food when I'm away, but I do like using local ingredients wherever possible, and also maxing out on those ingredients. So what you see there is a yogurt sauce with a bit of mustard. Condiments were provided in the kitchen. The yogurt also formed part of my breakfast and would be a topping for desserts. So a big pot of yogurt had many uses for me, but this was a great meal with some salad, apple slices, and a nice cup of tea. And I decided in the end that I just wanted to rest. I didn't want to go out again. I'd been out all day. And this is the women's dormitory. And as you can see, you know, it's a nice, pleasant space. And I only shared it with a couple of people during my stay. That was all. But at that point in time, they were letting half of the bunks to guests. Unless 2 people arrived together, they were not going to let the top and the bottom. It would, you know, it was one or the other. They were very considerate of, you know, infection control needs. But so I felt very safe in that regard as well. But it was just a lovely place to be. And most of the people that come to Bergen, they come for sightseeing rather than nightlife. So your chances of getting a good night's sleep, I think, are very high. So that was where I settled in for another good night's sleep. And this is, again, in the heart of Bergen, literally 10 minutes from the guest house. And I'm looking across the water to the Bergen spectacular KODE Galleries. That when I was there were 3 of them open. Sometimes there are more, sometimes more have exhibitions. There can be up to 5 actually in this area, but there are more KODE galleries in, you know, other areas, and I believe that you know, there's an increasing number, not necessarily in Bergen, but this was lovely. This was included on my Bergen card entry here, provided I did it early enough in the day, and I certainly intended doing that. I was wondering whether I was going to travel on the funicular railway in the morning or the afternoon, but I allowed the weather to decide for me because there were still heavy showers. And it was wonderful to go into those galleries. Each had a different exhibition. I loved the Edvard Munch exhibition. That was just wonderful. I did have the opportunity of seeing that in Norway, in Oslo, but it was quite expensive. And here it was all included, although if you do go to the Oslo exhibition, you will see a greater volume of Edvard's work. So that was how I spent my morning, and it was a very, very lovely morning, very restful, because one of the things that I wanted from this trip was to be able to amble. I had certain things that I wanted to see, you know, I wanted to see, and these galleries were among them, and also a visit to Troldhaugen was also among my choices. But really, I wanted not to feel that I was rushing from one thing to another, just to feel, you know, that I was taking my time. And it's easy to do that in Bergen, although if you only have a day there, then, you know, if you want to see lots, you would have to rush. But certainly, you know, in 3 full days, there was enough time for me not to do that. So this is the afternoon when the sun came out, and this is Fløyen, the funicular railway that goes up to the Fløyen area, which is famous for its wild goats. And whilst they are very friendly, you know, some people might think, oh, I don't know, I don't want to go somewhere with wild goats wandering about, but they're friendly. You know, if somebody came and sat on that seat, and I did it, that goat does not go away. It does not wander off. They're used to people, but they're not going to bother you. You know, I don't know what would happen if you took out a sandwich and ate it, but I don't think they're going to bother you. And the views from there are absolutely amazing. It is only 400 meters above the city, but I would say the views were greater than I expected with that kind of height. The image that I have behind me is actually one that was taken from Fløyen. And there's all sorts of things that you can do up there. There are walks, there are a couple of cafes, there are areas where you can sit, forested areas, play areas. It's just a very, very nice place to, you know, to either to walk, which I did, and to while away to have some at peace time. You know, I walked. I also spent a little bit of time filling out my, you know, doing some journaling because I love writing. And there, you know, it was never crowded, even though this was a perfect afternoon. And what happens with the railway is if the weather is good, they put on far more trips. And I know that on this day, they ran them late into the evening, which they don't always, but they're very flexible and they go with the weather because they want people to be able to make the most of it, which I think is lovely. So this is another view from Fløyen, or Fjellet, the Fløy mountain. And it's a beautiful mountain. You know, people will say, well, you know, 400 meters, it isn't a mountain, but in many parts of the world, that is considered a mountain. So, it's considered a mountain, and it's very, very steep. So you get that wonderful sense of being perhaps higher than you are, and being able to look into the far distance. And there was a place where I sat, where I actually took this photograph, and I could sit there and just watch the clouds changing, and I loved it. I'm so glad that I took that journey. But the most spectacular views occur on the way down. And I had a little bit of an amusing conversation here. The person running the cable car said, if there were teenagers, would they please allow adults to sit? And there is a lady standing who would probably like a seat. Now, that lady was me. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't want to sit. I just want to stand here and enjoy this view. So thank you for offering me a seat, but I don't want one. The view was just glorious all the way down. And just something that you wouldn't want to let go of. The views that I encountered on this trip, and I am used to very beautiful views, both in southwest England, Cornwall, the Isles of Scilly, Iceland, and parts of Sweden. So, I do have something to compare it to. I would say that the views are excellent, that it's very impressive, perhaps a slightly dreamy quality is how I would summarize that, but never more so than the area around Troldhaugen, that I hope I am pronouncing correctly. This is where the Edvard Grieg House, Museum and Chamber Music Hall are situated. And it is a short tram ride from Bergen. I did have to book this. I did have to decide in advance on which day I would go, because I wanted to go to the concert, which, obviously necessitated booking a seat. And at the time when I went, they couldn't even book adjacent seats. So I had to book that in advance, which I did. So I knew that I was doing that on the Friday. I wasn't fitting it around, whatever weather conditions may or may not exist. I was just doing it, and that was that. And it was the tram ride out there took me through some very pleasant scenery. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it was about 35 minutes. That's all it was to Troldhaugen. And there is then a walk, again, very scenic, to the actual house, museum, and chamber music hall, which are all situated very close together. And I was greatly looking forward to the lunchtime concert with this lady. This lady is Miriam Karatian. She is an Armenian. She was traveling in Norway for the part of the summer. She was very glad to be able to do that. And it was like around a 40-minute concert. And I so enjoyed it. I really did. But before you get to I did the trip. I did it this way. I traveled early in the morning. I went to the museum first. I had coffee in the cafe. I loved the museum, absolutely loved it. Seeing Edvard and his wife Nina's, who was also a very well-known and much lauded musician in her own right. Very, very, very well loved in the musical world. His wife Nina, their costumes were on show. And that the first thing that you notice is how tiny the couple are. They're just 147 centimeters tall, or around 4'10". They were both the same height and comparatively slight in build. And it was interesting, some of the notes, because looking at some of the notes in the museum, because other people had a thing about Edvard's height. He didn't. There was a sculptor that created a sculpture of him that, you know, made him several inches taller than he actually was, but still short. And he rejected it. He said, well, that's not me. You know, I am the height that I am, which I think was, you know, quite impressive. We all need to, in a way, own what we are and try to be proud of that. And I thought, you know, how nice, how inspiring that, you know, he just accepted that and wanted to be shown as he was. And I think that was lovely. So this business of, you know, we want to be shown as we are, not necessarily the airbrushed versions. In a different way, it was around then that people, you know, some people at least, were happy to be themselves, which I think is lovely. So this little statue is outside the entrance, and it's life size. He is not, you know, it is not smaller than he was. It's up on a plinth. It's life size. But I think you can see, in comparison to my 163 centimetre height and I suppose fairly average breadth, you can see how tiny he was. And yeah, this is him. And certainly in terms of musical talent, in terms of the compositions that he left us with, well, they were giant size, they were magnificent. So I was looking forwards to hearing a little of his work played by Miriam. So this is the chamber music hall, the acoustics of which are reputed to be among the very best in the world. It really is a glorious place. The first thing you notice when you come in is that window, which shows his chamber, his music composition hut in the garden, where he would sit and write music. And I kind of look at it and look at the surroundings and think, however was it that you were not distracted by those extraordinary views? Because there is a little lake behind the composition hut. It's not actually that clear from the photograph, but the blueness that you see, you can just about see that, you know, it is water. And I remember sitting there and just absorbing the ambience and feeling so at peace, a sense of expectancy, a sense of being, of timelessness in a way, because I do feel that composers are the conveyors of something, of some kind of inspiration that is out there in the world. And of course, they bring their tremendous talent to interpret in that. I am not suggesting otherwise. But it felt that I was part of a timeless thread as I sat there looking forwards with some excitement. And then the concert was opened by Miriam, and it opened with Edvard's Norwegian peasant dance tunes, which were lively and lilting. And from that moment on, I was totally captivated by the music. And I quite often sat there with my eyes shut. I am not knowledgeable about music. I don't play an instrument. I just love to listen. And I felt I was truly in the presence of something glorious. And then after the concert, Miriam joined us briefly in the cafe, and it was lovely to be able to talk to her There were no airs and graces. She seemed to really relish the opportunity to chat with people. And then it was time to move on. And this is Edvard's house. And if I had to give one word to describe this whole area of Troldhaugen, I would use the word whimsical. But at certain times and after the concerts is one such time. It is possible for people to view the house, which we did, and it was lovely to see the everyday things and items and to feel the atmosphere in Edvard's and Nina's home, because it has got a very, sometimes when people haven't lived in a house for a long time, it does feel like a museum. And whilst it is a museum, to me it felt more like a home than a museum, which was very nice. And really, that was my final sort of sightseeing destination. I came back to Bergen late in the afternoon and just wandered around, exploring those places that I wanted to see again because they were so nice. I just wanted to re-experience them. So I wandered through the Bergen area. I wandered around a couple of charming squares, including the one where Pygmalion is situated. And I couldn't resist sitting there with a glass of wine and a little snack. And this time I was able to sit outside in the sunshine, which was marvellous. And, the following day, it was time for me to fly back to Oslo, where I spent another couple of days. But, if you are interested in Bergen and you've got some hesitation, I would say don't be hesitant about the place because it has much to offer you. It is lovely to be in. And it is not that expensive when compared to, English cities, and it's a little bit cheaper than Oslo. But I would, if you want to go, I encourage you to go because it is very beautiful and I'm sure you will not be disappointed. So I thank you for joining me here, and maybe you would like to see one of my other videos. I do share photos and tell stories of travels from time to time, and also my other videos concern various spiritual interests that I have, including reading the runes. Thank you for joining me.